Good evening, everybody. I'd like to start the budget meeting in order here, continuation. Yeah. Everyone stand for pledge and moment of silence. Thank you, everyone. We're going to continue with our budget meeting. Dr. Vidala, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Olympio. So I wanted to provide just a brief overview. Prepared a couple new documents tonight in the interest of time and sort of moving forward. So we'll be able to kind of go back and forth between two documents. No major changes, but just provide a little bit of an overview. So the binder that you have, which is sort of our base, what we're starting with, is really the proposed budget, which is the 93,222,125. So that's all position supplies and resources maintained from the FY23 appropriated budget and what was in ESSER 3. That's in our binder. So that's where we started. So the adjustments were made to the underfunded line items, including health insurance, out-of-district tuitions, ordinary budgets, and transportation. And then we included all the steps and lanes and the other items that were agreed upon in the new CBAs. So what we're able to do is we have a new budget book, so it's the smaller document that you got today, and that would be the number that we talked about with the mayor, that would be the voted budget. So the proposed voted budget is $90,677,549. So that's that number, and that comes from our Chapter 70 money, which is about $35 million, and the anticipated municipal contribution, which is a little over $55 million. So that's where we get the appropriated budget. I also gave you what we backed out of ESSER, so the difference of $2.392 million. So we have an ESSER budget this year of $2,392,446. So what you see in ESSER is going to be all the items that we took out. So our goal when we were building the ESSER budget is to minimize the number of FTEs and focus on the non-salary items. So we want to really take our time to reduce the reliance on the ESSER funds to avoid a cliff next year when we don't have ESSER. So you may recall that last year we had over 60 positions paid for out of the ESSER budget, and this year we've reduced that to 16. So we've really tried to limit that down to 16 FTEs and then focus on the other contracted services. So what you see in ESSER is elementary reading teachers and interventionists, and we moved that over because ESSER is really about loss of learning and addressing the pandemic. So as a bulk, we can move these teachers and interventionists into that, and it's basically an appropriate use of those funds. The same thing with our virtual teachers from Peabody Prep. There's 7 FTEs there. And then 3 years ago, we started Teacher Fellows. That is a contracted service that we have with higher ed institutions, and it's not a salary item. It's an ordinary budget item because we contract with the university, and we pay them for the tuition. So that's in there. And then things from the curriculum and instruction lines and our staff development, it's basically the supplies and contracted services. We move those out and pay for them in ESSER, which is an appropriate use of those funds as well. So the total reliance on ESSER next year is $2,392,446. So that will help us reduce. You may recall we spent 3.5 last year in ESSER funds, and so this year we're looking to spend about 2.4. And that gets us to the overall total budget that you see for the voted budget of the $90,677,000. So I'm sure that you have questions on the first budget. So we can certainly go through the binder, which is the budget book. That includes both. But as we vote, we'll be voting on the 90 million number. So I wanted to tease this out so you can see both hand in hand, and we can make adjustments as we go, but I wanted to at least show, I think we probably have about 2 weeks of budget meetings before we need to get the final budget to the city council. So I wanted to make sure we at least have this spread out, separated out. You can see what's going to be funded out of ESSER so that we don't have an over-reliance on FTEs, and then obviously go through. And any changes that we make, whether we're looking at the binder or the updated book from today, we'll make sure that those changes get in to the next iteration of the budget. So at this point, I can stop sharing, and we can, answer any questions from the members or any clarification that we need on any of the documents that you have tonight.
Mr. Hockman?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Vidala. Thanks for the updated paperwork, Sam. Mr. Rippon, excuse me, thank you as well. I'm certain that you had a big part in putting these documents together. When I look at the binder, or let me, where would I look to see what our per pupil expense is district-wide?
I guess the short answer is, and I don't mean to be flippant with you at all, is define per pupil. And what I mean by that is what the accepted definition is, my understanding is what the DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, defines as per pupil, and that is on our end of year report submission, and they divide that by our foundation enrollment. And that's where you would find it. This is a subset. So you would be understating our per pupil, our true per pupil cost, because approximately another $20 million is allocated that counts towards that calculation from the city.
So through the chair to, I think, Mr. Rippon, if it's someone else, please speak up. So when, under the DESE definition of per pupil, are we talking about students that physically attend school in Peabody, or is it inclusive of out-of-district placements for special education and things like that?
It'd be inclusive.
So it would be every public school student that resides in Peabody, regardless of where they go to school?
Well, it wouldn't be the VOC kids or the charter students. They're claimed, so it's the students that we claim. So all of our in-district and out-of-district kids that we claim on our October 1st report, that's our foundation enrollment number. So
5,959 is what it was for purposes of Chapter 70 calculation.
Thank you.
So if you look at it just with the numbers that we have, it's a little over 15,000, but with the money that the city pays, we're above that.
Maybe
So-
18 to 19,000 per pupil in that ballpark, which is, I think, still below state average a little bit.
Okay. And that's include, and if we don't have these answers tonight, that's fine. We're going to be getting together, a few more times, I suspect. The $18,000 to $19,000 that we spend per pupil on average for the purposes of tonight. I'm not holding you to any numbers. I'm not looking to trick you or anything like that. That's inclusive of out-of-district special education costs as well.
Yes.
Okay. And if we back that out, or if you can for the next meeting, I'm not, looking for this tonight. If you can back out the special education out-of-district placement costs, would you be able to then tell me what our per pupil expenditure is?
For in-district students?
Yeah.
We could. I mean, it's all a frame of reference. So I just pulled up the DESE website, and in 2021, we spent $16,188 on per pupil. So that was our 2021. That's the most updated that DESE has right now. So if we iterate that out, 3 fiscal years in the future, we can come up with a number. For out-of-district tuition, we spend around $10 million.
Right.
So we could rough that out and then do the difference.
Yeah, if you can just get that for a future meeting, I'd appreciate that. I'm just trying to get an understanding of some of the costs that are being put in front of us. With regard to the ESSER grant, this is the third year of the three-year grant. So is the $2,392,446, does that zero that grant out?
We will zero it out. So right now, we're looking at, ending this fiscal year to get an exact number. Anything that is above and beyond that, we'll do purchases of equipment, supplies, things like that, and we will zero it out. We have until September 30th of '24. So this time next year, we can finish out the budget, and if there's anything left over, we can purchase items over the summer. So there is a little bit of rollover for us to go to September 30th of next year. So we could technically spend a little bit of money in FY '25, but we're planning on zeroing it out.
Okay. For now, I'll yield and let my colleagues have a crack at it.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Mr. Amico?
Thank you. Through the chair to Dr. Vidal, this is a little off topic, but it has to do with revenue coming into the state and hopefully coming into schools at some point, because that's where they were promised some of these funding. We've had marijuana, we've had casinos, and now we've had online gaming. I just read today that $20 million in taxes were brought in during March and April of just online gaming alone, not including the casinos and certainly not including marijuana. Has there been any indication from the state on what our future looks like? How much money is coming? Because it was earmarked, if I remember. Each one of those items had some kind of an earmark towards education. Do we have any indication? And if you don't, obviously, maybe that's something we can figure out.
I can share some information with you from the Mass Taxpayers Association that I attended a meeting about. The fourth bucket that I think is interesting to you is also the Fair Share Act, or the Millionaire's Tax. We won't know that number until next April, so we really can't calculate that or count on it for now. The other numbers, I think, might be a little bit overstated of how much we're going to get. They think maybe $100 million on the online gambling, which spread across the entire state's budget, might not move the needle a lot for districts. I believe most of that money would flow through districts in terms of things like Chapter 70, circuit breaker reimbursement, regional transportation, the rural schools aid, things like that. So it will probably come to us through Chapter 70. One of the biggest struggles that we're having now, and you're seeing probably across the Commonwealth, is a lot of districts are making cuts now. We're not quite in that situation. But what we're seeing is with the Student Opportunity Act, the municipal contributions are going up exponentially. And a lot of cities can't handle the rate of increase that is putting on their tax base. So that is something that we are being cognizant of, because the state revenue helps them give us more Chapter 70 money. But the municipal contribution for communities is also going up, and the communities need to find that money. So for example, Peabody will be giving schools another $3 million this year, and that's on our taxpayers. And so that's a minimum required contribution, and so that the growth year after year is something that is concerning, that we need to pay attention to and we need to be cognizant of.
And I guess, thank you, Dr. Vidal, for that explanation. I guess the reason why I am bringing that up is because of the last year of ESSER here. We will have, as Mr. Hockman mentioned, that will zero us out. So I'm looking at a $2,400,000 hole next year. So I'm thinking, where is that going? I know we're going to get an increase, but I'm thinking hopefully those three revenue streams come into play as well.
Yes, and that's what we're planning. And we did, the first year, we spent over $4 million. So we spread ours out, and we spent over $4 million, maybe 4.2. Then we spent 3.5, and this year we're trying to get under 2.5, really to try to wean off that reliance and get all the FTEs back into the budget to make sure that this transition is a lot smoother. We do anticipate another healthy increase next year in Chapter 70, which will then see another required contribution from the city, but what we want to do is minimize the impact on our taxpayers. So, we are very cognizant of that. Some of the things that we're doing in terms of applying for grants and things like that to increase our revenue, and some other creative ways that we can generate revenue. We're working with other partners to do that. So hopefully we'll be able to decrease the overall burden on the tax base as we come off of ESSER.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. Ms. Carpenter?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm not sure who's going to answer this, if it's the superintendent or for you. I want to walk through, under the special education line item, paras for the integrated preschool. So I just want to walk through that so I can understand what I'm reading. Just let me know when you get to that page.
Yes. Okay. So we are looking at line 17017.
Yes.
Yep. And so this is paras for the integrated preschool. And so in FY22, we had 13 FTEs paid out of the appropriated budget. And so what is unique about the integrated preschool is there's actually 3 funding streams that we can use to pay for items. We can use the appropriated budget. We can use the special education grant for early childhood, the 262 grant, which we fund some paras out of that. And we've also started charging some paras to the revolving account. So we have 3 different revenue streams. So what we're doing is this year, so we started doing that in FY23, this school year, 11.5, and we'll be level funding that out of this account and then supplementing the number of paras that are paid out of the, so they have more than 11.5 paras in the integrated preschool. Some are paid here out of this account, some are paid out of the integrated preschool revolving account, and some are paid out of the special ed grant.
Okay, so my question is, where do I find those so that I can get a total of how many paras?
Total?
Yeah.
Sure. We can send that to you.
Oh, it's not in here to look at?
No, it wouldn't be in this budget. It's not in the appropriated budget. The other budget, the grants and things like that are not here. So total paras for integrated preschool?
Yes.
Yep.
Do you happen to know how many total paras we have?
If you give me a minute, I can find it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to thank Dr. Higgins, who's done a ton of work in this area. So I believe we have 23 total paras in the integrated preschool. So I think that is our numbers, 23. So there are 8 classrooms, and I believe there are 23 paras.
Are they all part-time?
No. We have 2. So we have 12 part-time and 11 full-time.
Those are just in the integrated preschool?
Yes. That's what we have budgeted.
That's what we have budgeted, that's not what we have
Yes.
right now, though, right?
We may have some open positions, but that is what we have. We have budgeted to hire that many people. And so one thing that we have talked about is in the next school year when we do the assignments, we'll be looking to move more full-time paras down to the integrated preschool to make sure that they're fully staffed before we start the school year. But in terms of budgeting, we have 23 positions budgeted.
I'm sorry, could you repeat? Did you say move full-time paras down to the integrated preschool?
Correct.
From where?
From either the high school or the middle school, as we're hiring more teachers, special ed teachers to do co-teaching and things like that. So they will be in classrooms, and that will open up positions for full-time paras to be able to work with our younger students.
We're hiring more full-time licensed teachers,
At the high school
the
and the
high
middle
school.
school. Yes.
so we'll see that increase reflected in the high school line items?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and the middle school. You'll see more special ed teachers in both those 2 budgets.
And then those paras are gonna,
There'll be opportunities for full-time paras to work at the integrated preschool, yes.
And will this be in time for the beginning of the school year?
Yes.
Okay. And then in regards to the grant and the revolving account, they're not reflective in here for us to see?
No, those are additional positions to what is voted on. So they're additional, we spend money in the appropriate budget, but then we also supplement that with the grant funding so we can increase the staffing.
So that revolving account for the integrated preschool, that's the tuition they take in?
Yes, yep, so they take in tuition, we spend some money on supplies, and then we spend some money on salary.
Yeah, if we could get that back up as well. I think frequently this board will review the tuition rates for the preschool. We'd like to see what's coming in, how many special education students, how many role model students,
Yep,
those type
absolutely.
of things to kind of see how the program's working. I think overall, one of the themes that you'll probably see me ask a lot of questions about is regarding the paras. You know, I think we've had these conversations before. We see a huge increase of special needs, and I don't mean always a disability or special needs. Children have different needs. And the support that they get from the paras is interrupted when we have the part-time ones. When you, especially in younger children, when you change that face of the person who is there that they trust, especially at their age, when they're 3, when they're 4. A new person enters a room, and just for a typical child, never mind a child that needs more attention, it's a huge disruption. So I think as I go through this book, the theme of what I'm going to be fighting for mostly is to change a lot of those part-time positions to full-time, because I think it's in the best interest of the children, and I think it's what will help this district, especially in a preschool, whichever preschool that they're in. They have the added challenge of bathroom duties. You know, you can't just send a child to the bathroom alone. You know, there are feeding issues, so many different things that is even different from having a para in, every child's different. I guess the point is, I think we need to really start focusing on taking out those part-time positions and replacing them all with full-time. So I think that's where I'd really like to, you know, with the committee's support, kind of look at that.
So I don't disagree philosophically with that entirely. I do think that there is a need as kids get older to wean off of support, and there is an opportunity for when you're on a period-by-period schedule. It does help to have, you know, paras that can overlap, help with lunch duties and things like that. When you have full-time paras at the secondary level for your non-high need students, it does get complicated in terms of lunch breaks and coverage entirely. If you have 2 part-timers, there is an opportunity to have more coverage. As we look to wean off of ESSER and things like that, we do need to be cognizant of rising healthcare costs. The healthcare went up, you know, almost 10%. So these are real costs to the district, and I think, you know, I think we need to prioritize our full-time paras in the early grades, 100% in the integrated preschool and our elementary small group classes and all of those programs. I definitely think that as our kids get older, I do think there is an opportunity for some part-time work when they're on a period-by-period basis.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think maybe what I would ask for is maybe an audit or some type of really good, deep look into how many paras we have, in what schools, how many are part-time, kind of look at where they're needed more full-time. And I will say, I do remember a time when this board had discussed making paras part-time due to health care. But I think if it is a priority of this board to really take a deep look at maintaining a level of consistency for the younger children in regards to paras, I'm sure we could look at other line items in different areas where we would be able to find some money to make sure that we can make that happen. And again, that's, this is by a vote, you know, for the full board. It isn't just what I want. But I think maybe within the next meeting, if we could get a little bit more deeper look at the paras throughout the district and where are part-time, where are full-time, and maybe take a deeper dive there.
Absolutely. We've started some of that work, but I do think that a deep audit, especially as we're coming off of ESSER next year, you know, bringing maybe an outside consultant in and doing some real work into how are we spending money on paras, what accounts, things like that. I do think that's a great idea, and I think that's probably a good investment, you know,
Yeah.
for the board to do. And we could probably pay for that out of like a special ed grant or out of you know, something that's like a one-time capital cost, that's a contracted service. I think that, you know, we could certainly do that, and that can help inform our decision-making moving forward. But for next week, we can get that breakdown, because that is something we're working
I
on.
appreciate it. This is a
Yeah.
real priority, and it's something that it's echoed time and time again
Yes.
about paras, and I really do want to look at that. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate the board's time on that. Thanks.
Good. Thank you, Ms. Carpenter.
I'll play the new person card in this one. I got new to the profession. You mentioned tuition, and a couple of things I'm looking to do, not with rate setting, but with process to make it easier for parents, is to have payment portals, Unipay Gold for the preschool that allows for ACH and credit card payment. But it prompted the discussion with Daniel Peacock and over again at the McCarthy School, where we have our preschool, rate setting. And so, you know, I know it would be approved by the school committee. I guess I'm under the impression that for the 23-24 year, we're probably a little late to the party to look at changing fees as registration information has gone out for the 23-24 year. I guess I want validation, and if so, then I guess, you know, I think part of that analysis is going to maybe look at fees in general for F25.
If I may, John?
Thank you, Mr. Rippon. Yeah, Ms.
Generally, Mr. Rippon, this board sets all of the fees, and it happens to come at times like these, where we see that there's a need to change a fee. So if you're telling me that registration has gone out for some of the preschools with the tuition rates, you know, I don't know what to say. This is even a time where we set, you know, bus fees and change lunches and stuff like that. So I wouldn't say it's too late. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but this is generally the time that we do it.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Unless you bring it forward earlier, if, you know, it would be helpful if it was earlier as well.
Again, coming out of the pandemic, we are somewhat sensitive, but I think given the inflationary pressures, I think it's something that shouldn't be surprising necessarily, if not for '24, certainly for the year after.
Thank you, Mr. Rippon. Ms. Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Olympio. Mr. Chair. The first question I will ask is following up on what Ms. Carpenter has said. For our next budget session, could we please have a list of all of the programs where revenue comes to the school department, such as the integrated preschool? I don't know if we still get tuition from special education students in our community school, but I know that we have set those rates, and as she said, we usually do that in conjunction with the budget process, because then we know what we need, and we will send those out. So if we could have that for the next session, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. I had a different question when I had originally raised my hand, if I may. It's getting back to a question from the special education section, and I figure if we're on that, I'm going to ask it again. I guess I wasn't clear at the last meeting about the missing information when I requested it, because thank you very much for the papers that you gave us, but it's identical to what we had from last week. So my question was, all of our other sections have a page for the, I will call it the unit or school. So if you're looking at section 17, it is the special education cover page with all the line items. Following that, we have a list with employees and the salaries. Those pages actually stopped with line 17008. Now, Ms. Carpenter was speaking about line 17017. There is no salary section in the special education portion of our budget for line 17009 through 17020 in this document. And that was what I was asking for at the last meeting. So my question is that not here because those people and employees and positions are all in a grant?
I could tell you pointedly that that wouldn't be true. I know, again, I had followed up. I thought that information was prepared, right after that meeting. It appears it has not.
Yes, it's in the electronic copy. I'm not sure what's going on with our print version.
it's
But
on
I can
this.
send the electronic copy as well, but for the next one, we'll make sure that that's there. I thought you were clear about it. I thought, we looked at it, it's here, we printed it, and it just appears that it printed the same way. So we'll have to adjust something, but I can get it to you both ways.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. Mr. Amico?
Great, thank you, through the chair of the committee. Excuse me. So I just wanted to go back to Ms. Carpenter's discussion about paras, and I agree with her. I think we've seen since COVID, and even prior to COVID, that paras also provide that safety net, and it is truly a safety net. And Ms. Carpenter had mentioned that she will be pushing for full-time paras and all that, and I think my end is going to be on safety. I said this right after COVID is, COVID wiped out businesses, wiped out livelihoods, wiped out families, but one thing it didn't really wipe out was some of the things that we still have to do in schools like MCAS, which is, to me, is mind-boggling. But the one thing that we have to change, and I think we've started to do that, is to really look at how we handle safety. And that's not just here. We're a microcosm of the country. We see what's going on in the country. For me, this budget is going to be a lot about safety. I think we do an incredible job on instruction. I think we do an incredible job with getting our kids ready. I read off those 50 or so schools that our kids are going to. My biggest concern, and it has nothing to do with what we're doing, it's about being proactive and really setting the tone, is safety. And I think full-time paras, and I wrote down the word here, Brandy, and I think, excuse me, Ms. Carpenter, and then you finally hit that word, consistency. And in talking to friends of mine who have autistic kids or any kids in general, we're creatures of habit, we're creatures of consistency, and I think full-time paras not only bring a safety component, but they also bring that consistency, and so I'll certainly be supporting that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. Mr. Hockman?
Thank you. I'll ask a couple of questions. One may be better suited for the mayor than for anyone here, so I'll start with that. I know that we've talked in the past about concerns with custodians and tradespeople, and I don't see that in our budget, which leads me to believe that those positions are still funded on the city side of the budget, which leads me to believe that some of the issues that have caused us to have to ask for work orders and receive constituent phone calls and emails about repairs or other things not being made as quickly as some people would like may still continue. And I guess just, I'll throw it out there, and I'm not, if you can't, if it's a mayor question, we'll wait for the mayor. Why haven't we remedied this? Why isn't this back in our budget?
So I do believe it's a mayor question. I mean, I'm happy to continue the conversation, advocate for it as well. That was a decision that was made prior to my tenure or as I was coming in. And, you know, the decision was made for that to stay in the budget. I know there was some collective bargaining that has occurred as well. I don't think it's an easy switch back, but it is certainly worth a conversation.
No, I appreciate that, and while we're voicing as committee members things that we're going to push for, that's certainly something I'm going to push for, because, you know, we lived through, I think it was at the public hearing on the budget last year, when we had staff members from the high school talking to us about their inability to use restrooms. And I know that, or I believe that a lot of work has taken place since then, so I'm happy for that. But I don't want to get back to that point where we're sitting in a public session for a budget meeting, or in a public session for a general meeting, or receiving emails and text messages and phone calls about issues with our buildings, and you know, and our superintendent, who is the custodian with the big C for our buildings and the maintenance and care of our buildings, doesn't have the ability to directly access the folks that are able to make those repairs. So I will be pushing for that, because I think it's something that's important. In that same vein, through the chair to, I think, the superintendent, you and I, you know, I think you sat down with all of us individually and we worked through some of our priorities for the budget. And one of the things you and I talked about was putting money, earmarking money for maintenance in our buildings. Is that in the budget that we have? And if it is, can you show me, can you direct me to it?
It is not. We level funded the utilities lines, and for one-time capital expenses, that was something that would be earmarked through ESSER, that it wouldn't be in the budget. I do think the value of putting it in the budget is something that I do value. I think it's probably a bigger discussion with the mayor as well, if that's going to be something that we vote on. I would advocate for that. In the meantime, the one-time capital expense line that we would have would be something that would move to ESSER. And so I'm happy to reflect that in the next ESSER budget as well. But in terms of the appropriated budget, if it's the will of the committee and the mayor, we can find a way to put that a line. I think we talked about, you know, putting a line item, sort of reserving, you know, $100,000, $200,000, something significant enough that we can do it. Right now, we're using the revenue that we get from FKO and the revenue that we get from facilities rentals to do some of those things, but we have been limited with what we can do.
Sure, and if I may. Thank you, Dr. Vidal. I think the number that I was thinking about was more in the line of $400,000, but we can get there. You know, we've talked about the Brown and the Carroll. We keep calling them new schools. They're not new schools. They're you know, I've been here 15 years, and I think Ms. Dunn for 15 years has been talking about, you know, why don't we have money to balance the HVAC system? Why don't we have, you know, money to have routine maintenance on boilers and furnaces that might be 30 or 40 years old now? And, you know, we just, it seems like we get to, and this isn't an indictment on anybody in this room. This is just a historical practice here in Peabody. For some reason, we wait for buildings to get to the center school level of degradation, and then we say, well, there's an emergency. We need to spend capital money. We need to fix this or that. And I know that we've been somewhat proactive with the MSBA in trying to get some projects done, but it looks like at least for now, the accelerated, or what used to be called the green repairs, doesn't seem to exist anymore, which is why I'm more inclined to have a significant amount of money set aside. And this is stuff that I would expect outside services to come in and work on. And there would be warranties that we could rely upon, and there would be schedules, that, I know our custodians do a great deal of work within each building, and again, I'm thankful for that, but I'm talking about bigger items that we can, so that we can maintain our systems perhaps a little better, and, I don't know what the origin is or was for the heating issue here at the Higgins this year. I mean, this is a building that's 6-7 years old, and we had a wing in the 3rd floor without heat for an extended period of time, and that's not fair to our staff, and that's not fair to our students. I mean, Ms. Carpenter is talking about, and Mr. Amico, consistency with our students. It's hard to learn when you don't have good teachers and consistent teachers in front of you. It's hard to learn when you're hungry. It's hard to learn when you don't have heat. And I know we did, the best that we could with some alternate sources of heating, but that's why I'm looking to have a significant number funding a maintenance line. So it is a conversation, and I agree with you, Dr. Vidala, that this is something that I think the mayor needs to be a part of, and I'm hopeful that he's supportive of something like this, but we may need to shift around some of the things that we're looking at to develop those priorities of the committee so that we can perhaps get some of those things. And for now, for this turn of mine, I'll ask another question, which might be a lot smaller and a lot, something I hope you can answer. One of the other things that you and I, when we sat down, talked about was each of our schools have gardens. They all have raised beds, I think, for vegetable growth or flowers to grow. And we talked about, or I talked about, and you were kind enough to listen to me, the instruction that occurs when kids are outside in the soil and planting seeds and helping nurture plants so that they grow and they ripen into fruits or vegetables that they can then eat and get a better understanding, that food doesn't come from a grocery store necessarily. It comes from people and their hard work and their efforts, and there's science and math involved. And we talked about, you can, calculate the amount of water that's used and how much that influences growth on plants and fertilizer and things like that, and yield perhaps, how many vegetables come off one particular plant compared to another plant based on the, so there's actual STEM type learning that can take place. And each of our schools at one point had either, I think it was mainly volunteers. I don't even think they were stipended positions. I think they were volunteers. I know Mr. Stowey forever took care of the center school. He was there for a long, long time. And then, when he wasn't able to, some other folks stepped in. But I think, from what I'm understanding, from what I'm hearing, most of those areas aren't being utilized now. And what I was hoping that we'd see, and I don't, and if I may have missed it, but I don't see it, is some sort of, part-time position where we would have, maybe a staff member from Tilly's or from Brooksby that would be able to, cross over and spend, maybe 2 hours a week at each of the elementary schools, 2 hours a day at each of the elementary schools, and get, through them in a 2-week cycle so that we can take this on and really give kids an opportunity to appreciate some of the, it's a basic necessity, right? Food's a basic necessity, so I don't want to call it anything but that. But appreciate, when they're eating something, that it doesn't just come from, whoever their caregiver is going to the grocery store and buying it, or wherever they were to get it from. And I can't imagine that that's a big ticket, right? So I talk too much again.
Thank you, Mr. Tuckman. I'm so glad you brought that up. So at our next meeting, we do have Mrs. Sullivan from the South School is coming with a former Peabody student who's a horticulture major, and they are planning this spring, well, I guess we're into the spring, but before the end of the school year at the South, they want to pilot this and really start talking about, what it looks like and how we do it. And we'd like to expand it to all 8 schools. I don't have a number of what exactly it would cost or how we would do that yet, but I'm sure, as you said, I don't think it's a huge number or something that we can't fund, but I wanted to bring someone in who's an expert in the area, who's excited to start it, and Ms. Sullivan is championing that work. So we will have them at the next regular school committee meeting, a week from tonight, and then we can expand on, what the possible options are. But it is very exciting.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm happy to hear that. And I suspect that there's, I know we have the guru of grants in our payroll here at Peabody. I would be shocked. I'd be shocked if there wasn't a grant available through the USDA or some other agency for encouraging horticultural type activities when it comes to production of food and things along those lines. And so, but at least I'm happy to hear, Ms. Sullivan's been a champion for a lot of causes over the years. I'm happy to hear her take this on. And while I'm in this area, and I'll end here and give others a chance to talk, I hope we're not, I spoke to a state representative yesterday who informs me that I believe it's the House has introduced in their budget funding free lunching for school, and the Senate hasn't taken it up yet. Or I think that they may have a different version of a budget, and ultimately, hopefully, they'll conference. But we don't have any funding here for free lunch, and it's our expectation that we don't anticipate charging for lunch next year.
Right, we're anticipating universal free lunch again next year.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Ms. Carpenter?
Thank you. I just want to touch upon 2 things that my colleagues had mentioned. One, Mr. Hockman had mentioned the garden club. I do recall that we used to fund, and hopefully we still fund, I think it was 3 extracurricular after school and 3 non, and I believe one of them was the garden club at some of the schools. My kids were in it at the Burke, and I'm just wondering, did that go away? Are we no longer funding the 3 and 3, or?
We actually added in this budget.
Okay.
So if you look at any of the elementary schools, their last line item under extracurricular for the past 3 years, it's been 3,900, and this year it's 5,200. So we funded an additional position in each area.
So they're choosing their items?
They do choose, so they'll have 4 and 4 instead of 3 and 3.
Okay.
Yep, and so I think it's $650 per stipend, so the 3,900, represented 6 stipends, so 3 athletic, I believe, and 3.
That's what it was.
It was 3 athletic and 3 extracurricular,
Yep.
and now we approved, and then through the committee, I believe in the last negotiations, we decided to put in 4 and 4. So that is, you see that reflected as 5,200.
Yeah,
in
I
that
do
line
see
item.
that, yeah,
Yep.
and that's where I remember our garden club coming from, but if there's even more, that would be great. I think Mr. Hockman wants to tell
Yeah,
me
no,
something.
on that point, Ms. Carpenter, that's my memory too, and each principal had the autonomy to determine what those stipends were to be used for. What I'm suggesting is that I'd like to see this gardening not be an after-school club activity, because some kids can't participate in that. I want to see it part of the school day.
School day.
Yeah.
Got it. And then the other subject I wanted to touch upon was Mr. Amico talked about school security. When I'm looking at the high school line items, Dr. Vidala, if you can, I see that under building access attendant, we did increase that line, those positions.
Yes, so.
Is any of that a security portion?
Yes, yes,
We have increased.
Yes, so building access attendants, in last year's budget, we had 3.8, and then we funded 2 additional positions that we hired at the beginning of the school year out of ESSER. So those were put in, and we added another 2. These would be full-time positions to be at the high school. We have some of the work that they do is they work with the SROs, they do the perimeter sweeps. Some of them are bilingual or multilingual, and they're doing translations and working with students as well. And so we're adding additional 2 positions, and what Ms. Randall and her team would like to see is more coverage at the bathrooms as well, because sometimes they get pulled for bathroom coverage, which is a security issue, but she wants to make sure that we maintain the 5 throughout the building and an additional 2. And then the .8 is the after-school flex shift one that we have as well. So that is, you see that increase in that line as well, the building accidents. So that's what that would be for.
That's great. We don't have control over the SROs and those positions, so what we do have control over, you've increased, which I appreciate.
Yes. And we do anticipate that we will be part of the hiring. We anticipate that we do have 1 SRO retiring. That will be filled internally through one of our current SROs, and we'll maintain 4. So when that retirement does come up, Dr. Higgins and I will be part of the interview process with the chief, and Tim Sullivan is the supervisor of the SROs now. He'll be part of that, and they did a really great interview process last time, and they're welcoming us into that process again. So we'll have a 4th SRO on board to make sure, we currently have 4, but we'll make sure that is in place before the start of the school year. If the city would like to give us another one, I would happily support that as well. I've been on board that, I do. We have more than many other districts, but I think they're an invaluable resource. And, for Officer Ritchie, who goes to all 8 elementary schools, I love the SROs, would love to see more.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I would happily take more, should they give them to us. One of the things that I'm struggling with is generally we have school improvement plans before the budget to kind of hear about what the schools are looking for, how the year went, things that we can do to help them. Did those take place? Do you have reports on those? Do you have anything for us?
So I have the documents for the school improvement plans that were submitted earlier, the goals and the action steps and where they wanted to improve. We had individual meetings with the requests from the principals for the budget. I put those in the first budget presentation that we had. We didn't do the in-person the meetings. Again, the budget process has been pushed back so much. It is a difficult time of year to get the principals out at night. So I do want to be cognizant of that as well. We do have the school improvement plans, which I can share again. They're generally at the beginning of the school year, we had the improvement plans that they're working on in terms of their goals, and they kind of line up with the evaluation process. But then we met in January with everybody who's in charge of a budget. So we met with Mr. Simmons, met with Mr. DeRoches, and then all the building principals and the department heads. And so that was sort of a location by location breakdown of what they asked for, was in sort of our first budget presentation.
Yeah, I understand. I really like hearing them. I really like hearing from them. I like seeing them come up and talk to us about their schools and talk to us about their, things that are working, things that aren't working. I find it extremely helpful during the budget process. It sounds to me like you had done that for us and incorporated it into the budget. Moving forward, I would just request that we have them, we've had these discussions before where it does kind of creep into the budget, and we'll ask them for them a lot earlier, so that doesn't happen for the end of the year events, getting principals out in the evening and that type of stuff. And it can be kind of difficult, I think, to maybe predetermine what you need ahead of time where the school year is already starting, but they've been able to do it before. So just in the future, I would love to see those and have those and hear from them before this process.
Yes, absolutely. And I apologize this year with the new governor and not getting the number until into March and April. The process is just much later this year, but I would like to bring that back as well. And I do think it's a valuable piece, and it's good for them to promote all the great things. I think part of the beginning of the year is seeing where the school improvement plans are based on what we've approved for this budget, and then how they plan on implementing it, but then circling back and saying, how did it go, and what do you need next year as well? So I think the September-October meeting is really thanking you for what you've approved, and in January really focusing on, okay, how's it going halfway through the school year, and what are you going to need next year? So I think that it's twofold. And
Yeah,
I'd
middle
like
of
to
the
see it.
school year is good. Yeah. Thank you.
January.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Mr.
Sure, great. Thank you. Through the chair to the committee, and Ms. Carpenter had mentioned it, and Dr. Vidal had mentioned it a couple of minutes ago. We did meet with Chief Griffin, and he did mention that we were going to replace the retiring SRO, and he also mentioned in our meeting that there were several other people that were really interested. So if there are other people, other police officers that are really interested in working with our schools and our kids, I would be on board, and I think that's something that we, I know it's not our purview, we don't pay for them, but if that's something that the city can do, I would welcome that. 5 individuals over 4, I'll take that all the time. They're great people. They do so much for our kids, and with federal grants, who knows? I know we have a canine, Ella. She's overworked. You know, Eric Ritchie's all over the place. Who knows? Maybe we can get Ella a partner in the deal as well. But I certainly would welcome a 5th SRO. Again, safety should be our top priority before any learning goes on.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. Mr. Hockman? Ms. Dunn? Oh.
Yeah.
Mr. Hockman.
So for me, it sounds like we're dancing, right? We're all putting out some of our wish lists, and Dr. Vidal and the mayor have provided, or the mayor has provided us with our limitation, right? The budget number. So perhaps for next Tuesday's regular school committee meeting, if Mr. Rippon is able to give us an update on where we stand with this year's budget and expectations on what this year's budget will look like at the end of this fiscal year, because one of the ways that we can free up some money if we have any surplus is prepaying for some items for 23-24 with surplus from this year. So maybe I'm being hopeful, maybe I'm being naive, but if we can just get an update on that number, that may allow us to see what other funding sources may be available, for us to work on some of the items that we've identified as being important to us.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Ms. Dunn?
I'd like to follow up on something that Mr. Hockman brought up about the maintenance in our buildings. I support what you were saying. And I'd like to ask whether you would like to bring that up at next week's school committee meeting and make it an agenda item. Because I think that we need to be able to address that in conjunction with this budget. It's no secret that this committee has been very upset with the way that maintenance has been taking place in the buildings. There is some kind of communication gap. I would also like to inform the committee that when I was doing my research on the language in the city charter, I discovered that it is state law that if we did want to take facilities back under our control, we can do that by a majority vote. And I know that has implications on our budget. I know that this was originally changed because of budget considerations, but I'm going to go on record, it's not working, and we need to fix it. We really do. And we have a lot of other considerations about our facilities, about the maintenance, about plans going forward, and this is the time to do it. It has to take place. So if we could please put that on our agenda for the regular school committee meeting, I think it would be appropriate. It may be a continuing conversation, but I do think we need to speak about it and follow through on that. I'd like to follow up on something Ms. Carpenter said. I really would like to see the copies of the school improvement plans so that I can formulate my questions and my opinion on the budget. It's always been a very welcome exercise to hear those presentations. I feel badly that we aren't going to hear from those schools because you can learn so much from talking with the principals and their school council members. The people devote a lot of time. They are legally mandated. They are subject to the same open meeting laws we are, and they have done their job. And I'd like to at least honor that by hearing what they have to say and hear their input into their needs and what we have to decide here with our budget. time may be short, but it is time well devoted to the people who help us get this system on the road. And it's been a very, very good use of time to hear their input and understand what they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn.
I may be the only one, but I think we've come to a point where it's time to recess. Is that the will? If so, I'll make such a motion. If there's any objection to that, I'll withdraw the motion. Yes.
Oh,
Mr. Amico?
I just had a quick question. So for the next budget, we'll be receiving our book. We have the ESSER and grants. Is that what I'm just trying to figure out what, is that what you asked for through the chair to Ms. Dunn?
yes, all fees and revenues that come to the district in addition to the grants, the fees such
Okay,
as
okay.
for
I
the
just-
integrated
okay, I
preschool,
wasn't-
special ed tuitioning in, community school, any of the corporations that pay us for the use of the buildings.
Okay.
I'd like to see a report on that.
Perhaps we can get an email tomorrow or the day after with what was heard, was asked for, and then we can chime in on any omissions that might have been made. We have a motion on the floor. We'll call a roll or make a vote. Roll.
Second
To recess. Motion to recess.
Second.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for a great meeting.